Hey, Connor, how come you haven't posted anything since your review of The Invisible Man? Where the hell you been? Well, as fate would have it, I was actually in Ireland and Scotland the day that we announced the travel ban. So, as you can imagine, it's been an interesting few weeks.
I don't know what to say.
Obviously, the last few weeks for everyone has been very stressful. This isn't a political channel or a channel that seeks to delve into these types of issues. Suffice to say, if you're like me, you are at home being told to stay in shelter in place and quarantine yourself in the wake of the coronavirus. I'm not going to grandstand and really talk about that so much as to say we're all going to get through this. This is a horribly inconvenient and stressful time for everyone. But if there's one thing that we can say, it's that there are people out there who are doing their part to help all of us, whether they are firefighters, law enforcement, nurses, doctors, even the people at your local grocery store, making sure that we all stay fed. And if you're just someone who's not an asshole going out there and stealing the last roll of toilet paper because you're building yourself a gigantic toilet paper fort, you're also a hero. I am none of those things, although I can't hoard toilet paper. There's none in the stores here in Arizona. However, unconventional times call for unconventional heroes, and if there's one thing I was born to do, it's help you find ways to kill time during a quarantine. Obviously, a lot of local theaters are closed down, and yes, there are apps like Fandango Now, and art house cinemas like the Loft Cinema are streaming some of the movies they would be bringing in at this time. But right now, most of us are stuck with Netflix, Amazon Prime, Criterion Channel, Hulu, etc. So what I want to do is actually start looking at some of the films that maybe we all need right now. Some comedies that can bring some levity and laughter back into our lives.
At this point, for some reason, probably because I don't have my sidekick Joe to rein me in as a director, I just meandered for 10 minutes. So I'm skipping all of this bullshit just to tell you all that this list is not in any particular order, it's just movies I recommend and personally enjoy.
One thing that I think is interesting is the idea of the 80s sex comedy. It's called the 80s comedy, kind of unofficially, but realistically those types of films were made before the 80s and have been made since then. So I'm talking about your John Hughes movies, I'm talking about Risky Business. Those are always films with a common theme, right? And it's the theme of taking an innocent character and kind of thrusting them into what they kind of perceive almost as like an underworld, but is really just kind of another realm of reality they haven't been exposed to yet. So what we call teenage angst or coming of age. It's really just kind of a maturation in an untraditional style. And those scenarios where characters are uncomfortable are often a great foil for comedy. Now, I just referenced Risky Business, or as it was known in Germany, Joel's Party!
Die ist ja fantastisch.
Yeah. I'm actually not going to include that. I watched it recently. It's not as funny as I remember. I still really like it, but I just don't think it's as much of a comedy. What I would say is actually a really good kind of retelling of that story, a more modernized telling of that story, is the mid-2000s film The Girl Next Door with Emile Hirsch, Eliza Cuthbert, Timothy Olyphant. I think it's a really good movie that not enough people have seen.
Hey guys, post-production Connor here again. Normally this is the part where I'd show you clips from the trailer with no audio to kind of just illustrate my points, but there's only one trailer available for this movie, and it is so unbelievably bad, it immediately reminded me why this film tanked at the box office. But for the sake of comedy, you must enjoy this shit show.
Should have kissed her.
So, you can figure this out. You need a girl.
What are you thinking?
What are you thinking?
I don't know.
Someone who's gonna push him. Ooh, boxers.
That's my principal.
So you're friends with D, huh?
Timothy Olyphant.
I think there was even an article about this, about how the movie was so poorly marketed. I mean, the trailer is just a mess. There's too much going on, there's too much movement, there's too many cuts, there's too much explanatory text for no reason.
That's my principal.
There's too much music, there's too much of everything. But it is an incredibly heartfelt and enjoyable comedy that you can turn your brain off to, and it is so much better than this trailer. I think that summarizes what I was going to say anyway, so let's move on to the next one.
In the same vein of those 80s style comedies is a film that's actually from the 80s. And much like The Girl Next Door, it has a very young cast and it has a very young director. It's one of my favorite films of all time, and it's a film called Nightshift. Nightshift is a movie directed by Ron Howard, one of his first movies. Henry Winkler, the Fonz. You've got one of the first performances by Michael Keaton, who is fantastic as Billy Blazejowski. If you blink, you might miss, I think, the first performance by Kevin Costner. You've got, of course, Clint Howard's in it. You've got Richard Belzer. You've got this uptight character who works at a morgue, played by the Fonz, which is kind of a twist for how you picture Henry Winkler. And you've got this kind of crazed, almost cocaine-addled Michael Keaton character.
That's gonna be radical, Chuck. That guy's dead.
Both of whom joined together to turn the New York City morgue into, a brothel. So that's pretty fun.
Pay up, sucker!
Next on the list, I've got a special spot in my heart for kind of that weird cross between a buddy comedy and a road trip comedy. Obviously, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is really good, but a film that not enough people have seen, at least from my generation, is Robert De Niro in Midnight Run, which is another one of my favorite films. You've got Robert De Niro, Charles Grodin, young Yaphet Kotto, Joe Pantoliano, Dennis Farina playing an evil mob boss.
Sydney, sit down, relax, have a sandwich, drink a glass of milk, do some f***ing thing.
Rest in peace, Dennis. We all love you. It's a Martin Brest film with one of the best Oingo Boingo scores before Danny Elfman kind of went off on his own. And I just like saying Oingo Boingo. And if you like saying Oingo Boingo, Midnight Run's the film for you. If you've never seen Robert De Niro in a comedic role, or if you've only seen him, after he aged a bit in movies like Meet the Parents, Midnight Run is a classic. And you could tell it's a really good movie when I'm recommending it as one of my favorites, and it's a comedy that's like 2 hours and 15 minutes. Normally I would be whining and moaning about that. If you want something that's more of a classic comedy, I personally think you can't go wrong with Charade, 1960s film, Cary Grant, Audrey Hepburn, James Coburn, Walter Matthau. The film intentionally makes it so that you can't really tell the alignment of the characters, who's good, who's bad, who's really on Audrey Hepburn's side. But at the same time, the film is just as ambiguous and amorphous when it comes to the genres that it walks. You've got some romance elements, you've got some comedy elements that are pretty profound, but it's also a really good mystery and sometimes a really good thriller. It's like if Hitchcock really dedicated himself to a quality comedy mystery. And I think it really stands alone in that sense. If you want to go back even further, I think one of the greatest films ever made is a comedy starring Buster Keaton that's available on YouTube now because it's out of copyright, and it's called Sherlock Jr. This is a film that, it is a silent film, so if you haven't seen a silent film before, I suggest turning on Spotify and making your own soundtrack. But what makes Buster Keaton so legendary in the world of film is exemplified in this movie. His way of playing with the audience's expectations, his way of playing with depth of field, with playing with editing tricks in 1921 or 22. It's remarkable, it's genius, and even watching it now, he does certain things that I struggle to imagine pulling off with more than 100 years of technological innovation and people like Buster Keaton having come before me. Some of the things he does is just profound. And if you want to see something that's really different and that has that Buster Keaton kind of charm that pulls you out of wherever you are in the world, I think that Sherlock Jr. is the best example of that. And if nothing else, it's free and about 45 minutes long. So what are you really risking here? Finally, I'm not going to go into as much depth of these movies, but if you're looking for a few comedies that are kind of like soul food, where comedy doesn't necessarily need to have as much story, plot development, deep characters, where comedy is at its best, where you don't really notice the traditional pitfalls of storytelling in other genres, when comedy can just be entertaining and can transport you and can just make you feel comfortable and entertained, that's where it's, I think, most effective. So for instance, when I watch Mr. Mom, I'm not always worried about the logistics of the story or judging how well the character arcs are defined. I'm just having a good time. So Mr. Mom, again, Michael Keaton, second time on this list. A movie that I would go to when I'm looking to get cheered up. Another great film that I can always turn to when I need to smile is Blast from the Past with Brendan Fraser, rest in peace, I think. I haven't seen him in forever. Christopher Walken, Sissy Spacek, Nathan Fillion, Dave Foley, Alicia Silverspoon, rest in peace, I think. I haven't seen her in forever. Going back to 80s movies that may not have aged particularly well, but that for some reason still hold a special place in my heart, I would recommend Real Genius with a very, very young Val Kilmer. Just remember, don't watch this while eating popcorn. And the last movie I'm going to recommend today is one that has like a personal place in my heart. As far as feel-good comedies go, and in terms of movies that I think are good despite the fact that they've got a lot of simplified layering techniques, I'd go with Tom Hanks' directorial debut, That Thing You Do. It's kind of a love story to the Beatles, and it's about these 4 young kids who decide to start a band and end up accidentally creating a one-hit wonder that takes over the United States in the mid-60s. And again, an example of a film that is a great way to kill 90 minutes and feel good about the world. good soundtrack, a lead song that was ghost-written by the band that would go on to become Fountains of Wayne, if you were around for them in 2005. Rest in peace. I haven't seen them in a while. Thank you for watching. That is the list of films I have recommended today. If you have any films that you particularly like, let us know in the comments, and maybe I'll add them to my watch list. For now, though, I'm going to take off and start developing a new list for a different genre that'll be up here in a few days as we continue to find ways to kill time in a quarantine.